Hello and welcome to beautiful Mount Auburn Cemetery in Cambridge, Massachusetts. Today, we'll be taking a stroll through the cemetery with the aid of a self-guided tour from 1883, The Handbook for Cambridge and Mount Auburn by Moses King, a 40-page tour meant to showcase Mount Auburn's most attractive points and prominent monuments. And hey, just like last time when we did this in Newport, Rhode Island, our guidebook will be the only resource that we will be consulting on this trip. No internet, no other guidebooks, no extra research, no nothing. Our big question for this video is how good of a tour can we actually get with a 140-year-old guidebook as our sole source of information? Well, let's find out. So, according to our author, Mr. Moses King, before we even enter the cemetery, our attention will naturally be drawn to the stone gateway built of solid granite and evocative of an ancient Egyptian temple, which I can confirm. My attention is certainly drawn to that quite imposing gateway. I think we're off to a good start here. The guidebook also asks us to take note of the inscription above the entrance. Then shall the dust return to the earth as it was, and the spirit shall return unto God who gave it. After reading that inscription, we are now supposed to enter the cemetery and read the inscription on the inside of the gateway. Mount Auburn, consecrated September 24th, 1831, which tells us that every grave monument that we'll be visiting today must have been put up between 1831 and 1883 when our book was written. After examining the entranceway, Mr. King instructs us next to turn and begin our stroll down Central Avenue. One thing that I noticed here is that the book makes no mention of the large visitor center on the left here, meaning that the building was probably erected after the book was written. Continuing down Central Street, the book asks us next to look on the left for the Gasper Spurzheim Monument, our first actual grave marker. According to Mr. King, Spurzheim's monument is beautifully designed and executed, sitting on a hill and enclosed with an ornamented circular railing. We even get a very nice little 140-year-old drawing of the monument that we can compare to how the stone looks today, which, as you can see, is quite a bit different. There's no trace of that ornamental railing, and nowadays the hill that the monument sits on is much more prominent, probably due to this road flattening out the landscape over the last few decades. The modern visitor can actually get a much nicer view of the monument from the back if you walk up this little side path on the left here. And hey, real quick before we move on, I gotta come clean about something. I know I said at the top of the video that we're going to be exploring this cemetery using only Mr. King's guidebook, but I actually am going to bend my own rules just a little bit. See, when I first decided that I wanted to make this video, I started looking for old guidebooks through Mount Auburn, expecting to find maybe one or two, and instead I found a whole pile of them. Like, for example, we got A Guide Through Mount Auburn for the Benefit of Strangers Desirous of Seeing the Clusters of Monuments with the Least Trouble, from 1847. I ultimately chose Mr. King's guide because it seemed the most thorough and contained a lot of extra commentary on the monuments that would be interesting to read through, but one thing that I couldn't ignore is that pretty much all of these guides contain some really spectacular old drawings that I thought would be a bit of a shame not to include in the video. So, throughout the tour, I am going to insert just some pictures and drawings from other guidebooks. So, with that little amendment to the rules in mind, we can also take a look at this drawing from 1839 and see a nice little depiction of how visitors used to stand and view the Spurzheim Monument 185 years ago. And by the way, some of you also might have noticed that the King Guidebook describes Spurzheim as a celebrated phrenologist, which is a pretty stark reminder that we are dealing with the 19th century here. Because for those of you who don't know, phrenology is an old school pseudoscience claiming that the shape of your skull and face determines your personality. Like, for example, here's a phrenology book from 1902 that's telling us that anyone with this shape of head is automatically selfish and dishonest, whereas this guy has the skull of a truthful man. As I'm sure you can guess, a lot of this stuff was explicitly racist, so for good reason, you are pretty much never gonna read the phrase celebrated phrenologist in a guidebook from 2024. Getting back to the tour, the book next instructs us to turn from the Spurzheim Monument and find the Goddard Stone across the road. And then the Gedney King Monument right nearby. The Willis lot is up next, containing a monument of a very neat and appropriate design, according to the book. Although, I do regret that the once equally appropriate iron fence is no longer visible. And now we come to the first major discrepancy between 1883 and 2024. After Willis, Mr. King tells us that the lot of George H. Jones should be up next, containing a large monument with a male and female figure on either side. Under one of these figures, we should read the word not, and under the other, the word separated, which sounds like a pretty striking gravesite to me. But unfortunately, in person, I couldn't quite find what the book was talking about. I'm fairly certain that this little cluster of headstones is for the Jones family, mostly because this headstone on the far left does in fact say George H. Jones. Although this guy died in 1904 after the guidebook was written, so he's probably an ancestor of the George H. Jones mentioned in the book. I assume these other stones are also for members of the Jones family, but they are mostly illegible today and don't really match the description from the book anyway, so I'm guessing that the monuments mentioned by Mr. King were either removed or replaced or destroyed somehow in the last 140 years. Moving along, we continue down the road, noticing the Goddard Monument on the right. And then we come to one of Mount Auburn's most famous landmarks, the great bronze statue of Dr. Nathaniel Bowditch. According to the book, the first full-length bronze statue ever cast in the United States, erected way back in 1847. Mr. King tells us that Dr. Bowditch was a famous navigator and scientist, on par with the great Sir Isaac Newton. But if you want more information than that, then you're gonna have to go out and find a copy of the Bowditch Memoirs, because Mr. King is just gonna defer to those. The book does give us one little anecdote about Bowditch though. Apparently, while this statue was en route to the cemetery, it was placed down for a while in the middle of the street in downtown Boston so that everybody could gaze upon it with admiration before it resumed its journey to Mount Auburn. One local newspaper seemed to be really moved by the whole ordeal, so much so that they published quite a long dedication poem to the whole event. Here's the first few lines. Friends and neighbors, cease your traffic. What is this comes passing near? Heavy o'er the groaning pavement, moving slowly like a bier. Lo, it seems the sculpted semblance of an old and reverend man. Bid them stop a while before us, let us all the features scan. Well, we knew him, yes, we knew him, see his high and massive brow. But how solemn looks he sitting, meditating seems he now. Moving along, directly behind the Bowditch statue, we can find a broken column on the Coleman lot, complete with a very pretty little winged hourglass. And then we come to an absolutely gigantic marble cenotaph honoring lost members of the United States Exploring Expedition. Which, if you haven't heard the term before, a cenotaph is basically just a grave monument meant to honor someone who is buried somewhere else. The guidebook also calls attention to the inscription on the cenotaph, which reads, Lieutenant Underwood and Midshipman Henry fell by the hands of savages while promoting the cause of science and philanthropy at Malolo, one of the Fiji group of islands, July 24th, 1840. And that is all that Mr. King has to say about that monument. It's very funny to me that he asks you to read that incredibly evocative inscription and then offers zero explanation for it. Continuing with the tour, also near the Bowditch statue is the lot of Little and Brown, two partners in a publishing house. And let me tell you, Mr. King absolutely loves these two monuments. So far, he's complimented a few stones by calling them appropriate or neat, but here, he really kicks it up a notch. Like, just listen to this. Let me read you word for word his writing here. This lot attracts attention from the peculiar appropriateness of the design of its two freestone Gothic monuments, and the care that is evidently bestowed upon the lot itself. Everything about it looks neat and in good taste and devoid of any attempt at display. Now, if you detected just the slightest bit of snark in that last sentence there, devoid of any attempt at display, then I think there's actually a good reason for that. See, one thing that I haven't told you about yet is this little preamble that Mr. King gives to his tour. In it, he says that he is going to help you find Mount Auburn's most prominent monuments, and he's going to print some of its most interesting inscriptions. But the one thing that he is absolutely not going to do is indulge in any remarks concerning the want of good taste that may seem to have been exhibited in the arrangement of any of the lots. Because of his sense of propriety, he is not going to criticize some of the aesthetic choices made in some of the burial lots. He is going to tell you about Mount Auburn as it is, not as he thinks it should be. But even then, I gotta say, every once in a while along the tour, you kind of get just the slightest hint that Mr. King might not approve of some of the design choices on the monuments. Case in point, the very next stop, the monument of Dr. Sharp, a former pastor from Boston, Massachusetts. Mr. King says that the monument always attracts considerable attention for its peculiarity and that it is an exceedingly ornate structure. Which, I don't know about you, but that kind of sort of seems like a thinly veiled slight to me. Especially when you consider that Mr. King literally just got done praising the previous lot for not being overly flashy. Moving along, right next to the Sharp Monument is the Lawrence lot, which, as Mr. King tells us, is one of the most attractive to every visitor. The gate to get inside was locked when I came by, but That's okay, because I actually think my favorite part of the lot is the fact that the gate says Lawrence. Very near the Lawrence lot is the cemetery's funeral chapel, a great granite building with a heavy Gothic design. According to the book, this is actually the second chapel built in this spot. The first looked almost identical, except that there was iron in the stone used to construct the building, which led to some staining issues on the outside. Very near the chapel is our next stop on the tour, a freestone temple with a marble relief erected on the Shaw lot. As you can see, the passage of time has not been kind to the marble slab. Right next to Shaw is the Mary Troll stone. And across the road is the gigantic Brewer Monument with its highly embellished columns and Gothic leaves. And check this out. This is one of my favorite picture comparisons on the entire tour. Here's the monument as it looks today, and here is a drawing of it from 1861. As you can see, the monument itself is almost exactly the same, but that absolutely gigantic oak tree back there is nowhere to be found in 1861. Always fun to get a little reminder of just how long these great stone sentinels have been sitting here. Continuing on with the tour, we next come to one of the most touching monuments in the entire cemetery, at least in my opinion. The Charles Valentine stone displays a woman resting against an urn with the words, "My husband," inscribed beneath. And now we come to one of the stranger stops on the tour, one of my favorites. This is the Benjamin Franklin Monument, erected to honor the great American printer, philosopher, statesman, and patriot. Now, if you're like me, when I first arrived at this monument, you might be a little confused because isn't Benjamin Franklin buried in Pennsylvania, not Massachusetts? And what's really interesting is behind the Franklin Monument, down the hill a ways, is a smaller, nearly identical stone for a man named Thomas Dowse. So here's what's going on here. This guy, Thomas Dowse, paid to have a giant cenotaph for Benjamin Franklin erected on his cemetery lot, and then he got himself a smaller version of almost the exact same monument for his own grave. I love these two monuments. Like, there's something very amusing about this whole thing to me, because just like, what better way to make sure that you're gonna be remembered than to buy two of the same grave marker and give one to yourself and then another one to one of the most famous Americans of all time who isn't even buried anywhere near you. Like, I have no idea if that's actually what Thomas Dowse was going for, but I just love the unorthodox thinking that's on display here. Like, why not put up a memorial to someone else on your own gravesite for literally no other reason beyond the fact that you just respect and admire that person? Like, maybe when I die, I'm gonna go ahead and leave in my will that I want two identical headstones, one for me and one for Steve Irwin, the crocodile hunter. Anyway though, getting back on track with the tour, next we turn from the Franklin and Dowse monuments to find the Door Stone, the Harris marker, and a collection of beautifully sculpted marble on the Levi Brigham lot. Mr. King also instructs us to find the Dillaway lot at this intersection, which I unfortunately could not identify in person. It's either somewhere near here and I just missed it, or the stone is completely gone nowadays. I did spot the Alvin Adams stone though, exceedingly rich in design and beautiful in execution. as well as the Homer freestone sarcophagus just behind it. Nearby is the Sumner Hudson Monument, and then, for the first time on the tour, we are told to depart the paved road and embark upon one of Mount Auburn's many foot tracks. Welcome to Yarrow Path. First up along the path is the monument for Thomas Green Fessenden, a local farmer and agricultural writer. Then we look for the Buckstone, which I think is this right here, although the inscription is way too worn down to tell for sure. I also found this monument here to a man named Channing, which is not actually on Mr. King's tour, but I wanted to take a stop at it anyway because it is featured in one of the best old drawings that I could find in any of the guidebooks. Returning to the actual tour, Windsor and Turner are up next. I especially like how nice this marble cloth looks on the Turner monument. And directly behind those two stones is a very interesting lot where Chaplin and Dexter are laid to rest. And what's cool about this one is that Dexter actually designed and sculpted these two monuments himself before he died. Mr. King tells us next that a sculpture of a kneeling child and another of a sleeping infant should be visible on the Robinson lot, but in 2024, it appears that only the kneeling figure still remains. Former Secretary of the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, Edward Dillingham Bangs, is memorialized nearby. Along with George P. Bangs, a well-known Boston merchant. And now we come to one of the bigger absences on the tour. Mr. King tells us that there should be a sculpture of little Emily up next in the Binney lot, which we can confirm by looking at some old drawings and other guidebooks. But unfortunately, it seems that that sculpture has since been replaced by a much more modern stone that just bears the name of the Binney family. I assume that the statue must have degraded to a point where it had to be removed and replaced. Next is the Dana Monument, and then we exit Yarrow Path and walk onto the paved Fir Avenue, where we notice at the left the McGowan Monument, one of the most beautiful in the grounds, according to Mr. King. A large pedestal of marble with two weeping female figures situated on top. After McGowan, we turn onto Elm Avenue and visit the Sargent lot. And then walk up some stairs to view the Norcross Monument. I unfortunately could not find the Stedman stone, but the Knight Monument was very easy to spot. And by the way, I'm also very happy to report that this seems to still be the original iron fence surrounding the lot here. It seems like these railings have become a bit of an endangered species along the tour. Mr. King then instructs us to do a little loop-de-loop back onto the road with the McGowan Monument, where we find the Boynton lot that seems to have a new grave marker in place of whatever was there in 1883, and the Jones Stone. The Great Granite Shaw Monument is also on this road, with one of my favorite inscriptions on the whole tour. Just check this out. Boast not thyself of tomorrow. This is the state of man. Today he puts forth the tender leaves of hope. Tomorrow blossoms. The third day comes a frost, a killing frost, and nips his root. There's also a very nice sculpted hand visible on this monument. Next, we turn onto Heliotrope Path, looking for a marble statue of Little Frank, which I think used to be somewhere right around here. There's no sign of the statue today, although we can tell from some of these old drawings that it used to be quite the sight. Moving along, we pass the Reed Lot and the Lucius Bowles Monument, complete with Bible, belt, and crown. And then we come to another of Mr. King's favorite grave markers, the Binney Monument. Very well documented in old drawings. Interestingly, the drawings on this one don't really match up that well to how the monument actually looks. The clothes on the angel here in particular are very different. Next, we return to the road and pass the very appropriate monuments of Poor, Pratt, Leland, and Dunbar. And then, finally, we come to Ella, another one of Mount Auburn's most famous burials. A white marble sculpture that has definitely seen quite a lot of weather over the years. Again, interestingly, the old drawings don't quite match up to how the statue looks in real life. Moving along, we find the Ritchie Monument and the very unique Comer Lot, before turning onto Spruce Street, upon which we meet the French and Pearl families, both memorialized on the same stone, as well as the Robert C. Mackey marker with its Bible and cross. And then we come to a very unique grave marker. Mr. King refers to the Wells Monument as peculiar, but very appropriate. It is made of sandstone and is completely bare of ornament, with the exception of 4 hollow crosses cut into the top of the stone. Next, I could not find Stickney or Wason, but I did see another one of Mr. King's favorites, the Allen Monument, frequently noticed by many as being one of the most beautiful, according to the book. Highly ornamental, a must-see for all of Mount Auburn's visitors. And also exceedingly difficult to describe. So it's a good thing that we have some old drawings to do the talking for us. And then we get another wonderful little piece of halfway snide commentary from Mr. King. He tells us that the upcoming ornamental lot of Tisdale and Hewins will undoubtedly attract our particular attention because it is always kept in the best order, which Mr. King wishes he could say about some of the other grave plots in Mount Auburn, because some of them are totally neglected. Funnily enough, this is kind of an ironic statement in 2024 because the lot of Tisdale and Hewins is actually one of the more overgrown nowadays, which I think looks kind of cool personally, although I am sure that Mr. King would not approve. Back on the tour, we come next to a very nice statue of a Newfoundland dog, apparently carved to forever guard his owner, buried beneath his little marble paws. Next, we find the Goddard Monument, the Billings Lot, and the Ward Memorial, as well as Alden, Lothrop, Kittredge, John Parker, and Trull. The Abe Monument is very nice, with its hand pointing upwards towards a scroll that says, "There is rest in heaven." And similarly, the Burgess Stone next door has a bird and a scroll carved into it, which are both just barely visible 140 years later. Then we see Gibbs and Phelps, Barney and Frost, and then a very interesting monument on the Milton lot. Mr. King calls this stone peculiar, and I can't tell if it's because there used to be something sitting on top of this pedestal, or if the reason that Mr. King is calling this monument peculiar is because the pedestal is just the entire thing. The tombs of Meade and Reed are up next before Mr. King directs our attention to the giant statue of Reverend Hosea Ballou, sitting up on the other side of the road, a universally beloved and respected man, according to the book. You might also notice that there is no fancy inscription on this monument, which King greatly appreciates. He says that Ballou's epitaph is instead written in the hearts of those who loved him. After viewing the Ballou statue, we next turn off the road. Walking between the Gray and Prince tombs on the left, and the Stetson Monument on the right. We then take a look at the Upton Lot and the Swallow Monument before continuing our tour down probably one of the prettiest little paths in the entire cemetery. Unfortunately, most of these stones are illegible nowadays, which is a bit of a shame considering one of them apparently has a very nice little epitaph written by a husband for his wife. It reads, "My wife, she was always so pleasant." Next, we approach the Martha Whitting stone, which unfortunately also does not have much of a readable inscription anymore. Back in 1883, it used to say, "In memory of our teacher, who died on August 22nd, 1853. She hath done what she could," erected by the pupils of the Charlestown Female Seminary. And then we come to the Hannah Adams stone, upon which an inscription claims that Hannah was the first person to ever be buried at Mount Auburn. And then Mr. King quickly clarifies that actually she was the 9th. Either way, Hannah also offers to us another incredible little drawing comparison. Next is the lot of the Scots Charitable Association, along with its extremely impressive fence, which Mr. King takes note of as peculiar once again. I think his two favorite words for describing things have to be appropriate and peculiar. Next along the tour, we visit Wales, Salisbury, Wells, and Smith, before finding the very unique Osgood family monument. Among the names on this stone is Francis Sargent Osgood, a poet. And it's also worth taking note of the harp with broken strings sitting atop the stone. Next, we visit Holmes and Worcester before turning down onto another very pretty little footpath, where Mr. King tells us to stop and remember Barnabas Bates, the father of cheap postage, according to his headstone. And then we come to another powerful reminder of what 140 years really looks like, as Mr. King next begins to gush over the incredible whiteness of the granite Leighton and Beale monument, which looks like this today. The Elliott stone appears next with its rough freestone cross, and then, after a couple of turns, we pass a great granite obelisk commemorating 4 different names, and finally, we find ourselves at the base of Mountain Avenue and the famous Mount Auburn Tower. Without a doubt, one of the cemetery's most famous landmarks, one of the few sites that I was absolutely certain was going to show up on the tour. And so now, we are given permission by Mr. King to ascend the tower and gaze upon one of the finest views you can get anywhere in the Boston area. And that, I am sad to say, is where my tour had to end. The cemetery was about to close at this point and the sun was going down, so I unfortunately had to cut the last few pages out of the walk, which is a shame, but still, I feel like we already got more than enough of a tour to answer our central question, right? Because to me, undoubtedly, we have proved that you can still follow a self-guided tour from 1883 and have a great experience at Mount Auburn. Just like last time, this was some of the most fun that I've ever had filming a video. Mount Auburn is absolutely gorgeous this time of year, and Mr. King did a wonderful job of pointing us towards some of the cemetery's most interesting and beautiful grave monuments. All in all, a wonderful experience. Thank you for watching, and I hope to see you next time.